HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder Goes Mumming by Charlotte Macleod, read by William Dufris.
For Ailsa, Anita, and Phyllis. Chapter 1. Detective Inspector Madoc Rhys was a happy man. He had a 4-day Christmas holiday by official UKs from RCMP headquarters at Fredericton, New Brunswick, and he was about to take Miss Janet Wadman to dinner. Rhys had been seeing a good deal of Miss Janet Wadman since she'd returned to her job in St. John this past September, though not so much as he would have wished. The nature of his own profession tended to require his presence at the scenes of mysterious malefactions, whose perpetrators never bothered to consider that it would have been kind of them to commit their crimes closer to Miss Wadman's temporary abode. Janet was lodging in a furnished room with a widow lady of high principles and suspicious nature. Madoc Rhys had been allowed into that room for the first time this same afternoon, and then only because he had brought his mother with him. He smiled at the memory as he adjusted his tie. He'd phoned down from Fredericton and told Janet he was coming to meet his mother, who was on her way to join his father in London. Being Janet, she'd replied, "I can't ask her to supper in this room, because I have nowhere to cook it, but if you'd like to bring her for a cup of tea, she's welcome. I do have an electric kettle." Madoc's mother was not used to being entertained in bedsitters by farmers' daughters working as stenographers. She'd been a trifle starchy at first, but Janet's scones and lemon cheese tarts had soon thawed her out. When she'd exclaimed, "I do so wish we had a bakery like yours at home," Janet had turned bright pink and primmed her lips. Madoc, being a truly astute detective, had at once realized why. "What did you do, Jenny?" he'd asked. "Get up at 5 o'clock and swipe your landlady's oven?" "Well, you can't serve boughten pastry to a person's mother," she'd replied. Moments later, Janet had addressed that mother as Mrs. Rhys, and had to be told that Mrs. Rhys was in fact Lady Rhys, wife of Sir Emlyn Rhys, the noted choral director, mother of Dafydd Rhys, the famous operatic tenor, and of Gwendolen Rhys, the rising young clarinetist. Furthermore, Lady Rhys herself had once sung "Ah, sweet mystery of life, at last I've found thee," in front of the Queen Mum, before she had sacrificed her own musical career to those of her distinguished husband and her gifted children. And for goodness sake, hadn't Madoc explained? Far from being overawed, Janet had observed, "Wasn't that just like Madoc?" and offered Lady Rhys another lemon cheese tart for the road. On the way back to their hotel, Lady Rhys, who had always found her renegade second son a sore trial, had remarked that the Wadmans must be a very decent family, and thank heaven Madoc had shaved off that god-awful mustache. Without the drooping reddish fringe on his upper lip, Detective Inspector Rhys looked less like an out-of-work plumber's helper and more like an aspiring young poet whose parents had a little money. He'd got his wavy, almost black hair cut by the barber, who was not a lineal descendant of Sweeney Todd, bought some decent clothes for a change, and begun having a different sort of trouble with his female suspects than he was accustomed to. Tonight, Madoc was wearing the dinner jacket he'd acquired as a hand-me-down from Dafydd when he was 18, because his mother insisted one never knew whom one was going to meet, and one owed it to one's father's position. Lady Rhys had tactfully given Janet to understand that a dinner gown was not absolutely de rigueur. Janet had been astonished that anybody could even think she owned a formal gown, much less would wear it out in public, unless to a grand installation of the Loyal Order of Owls or some such overwhelmingly solemn event. She did have a long red velvet skirt she'd bought because it was warmer around the legs than a short one. Lady Rhys said the skirt sounded perfect. Madoc thought it sounded rather dressy for a St. John restaurant, but had sense enough not to say so, knowing he himself was stuck with Dafydd's old suit in any case, and not wanting to upset the apple cart, which was trundling along so delightfully. Besides, He wanted to see how Janet looked in red velvet. Janet was no longer the hag-ridden, desperately courageous little creature Rhys had met last August, and managed to keep from becoming corpse number 3 in one of the most bizarre cases of multiple murder he'd ever handled. He hadn't quite realized how much she'd changed until he had seen her beside his own mother this afternoon, quite at ease and blooming like an out-of-season rose. He took a taxi to the rooming house and recklessly kept it waiting, while his adored one put on the finishing touches and came down. Janet's landlady, who had been wont to eye Rhys as a potential seducer and betrayer, and hadn't put any real stock in that yarn about his mother's coming to tea, was sufficiently awed by the splendor of Daffet's old suit to attempt a smile and hope Mr. Rhys's mother was enjoying her visit to St. John.
"I'm sorry I didn't get to meet her," she added rather pointedly.
"Yes, well, I'm sure Mother would have enjoyed meeting you, too," Rhys answered, because his profession required him to do a considerable amount of lying anyway, and it was, after all, the season to be jolly.
"Ah, there you are, Jenny, right on the button. I didn't want to keep Lady Rhys waiting."
Janet gave her now open-mouthed landlady a pleasant nod as she swept out of the house in her skirt and the beaver cape her sister-in-law Annabel had insisted on lending her, because Annabel was no fool and had seen which way the wind was blowing as soon as Janet had started bringing Madoc up to the farm for weekends. The cape had in fact belonged to Annabel's grandmother, but was well preserved because the Dufris always bought quality and took good care of it. An attached hood and a fat little barrel muff completed as captivating a costume as was ever flaunted before an infatuated male.
"You're straight off a Christmas card,"
said Madoc, helping himself to an extra kiss as he put her into the taxi.
"I suppose you realize Mother's crazy about you? While we're on the subject, so am I. I'd begun to have a feeling you might be."
Janet snuggled up close and let the hood fall so that her soft bronze-brown hair rested against his cheek.
"That makes it cozy all around."
Unfortunately, they had only a short ride to the hotel. Lady Rhys was waiting for them in the lobby, doing Sir Emlyn proud in black velvet and diamonds. She was chatting with some very important person, whose name she couldn't recall.
"My son Madoc and his fiancée, Janet Wadman," she introduced airily.
The very important person observed in all sincerity that Madoc was a fortunate young man, and took his departure. Madoc protested, though with no great violence.
"Mother, Janet hasn't said she'd marry me yet."
"Madoc, don't be silly. You two are obviously besotted with each other, and Janet is hardly the sort to go in for anything silly like those young nitwits Daffet is always hopping in and out of bed with. I've got to leave St. John Airport on the stroke of midnight to connect with my overseas flight from Halifax, and I have no time to waste on pussyfooting." Lady Rhys took off a relatively modest but still impressive diamond.
"This was my own grandmother's engagement ring. I decided long ago that I'd pass it on to whichever of my children got married first. Janet, I should be greatly honored if you'd let Madoc give it to you now."
Janet started to say, "Oh, I couldn't," then caught Madoc's eye, which was both besotted and beseeching, and decided she might as well. Shortly thereafter, she shed her cape and muff, fixed her hair, which had got disarranged from all the kissing and hugging, and swept into the dining-room between her betrothed and the distinguished lady who was so determined to be her mother-in-law. She looked so radiant in her red velvet skirt and little red vest with a white ruffled shirt-waist under it that any number of diners turned to stare, and Madoc nearly exploded with pride. He ordered champagne, expressing the courteous hope that the bubbles wouldn't get up Janet's nose and make her sneeze, the way his mustache had done the first time he kissed her. Janet blushed an even more dazzling shade of rose, and told him that was a fine way to talk in front of his mother. Lady Rhys wondered if perhaps they shouldn't have the wedding at St. Gregory's. Janet replied politely but firmly that the wedding would be held in the Pitcherville Reformed Baptist Church, and that her brother Bert would give her away.
"In his loyal order of Owl's regalia," Madoc teased. "If it makes him happy," she replied. "And we'd be delighted to have you sing Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life, Lady Rhys, if you will. We're all very fond of the Queen Mum back home."
That struck Lady Rhys as hilarious. She laughed until she had to blot away the tears with her napkin because she owed it to her husband's position to present a decorous countenance before his great Canadian public.
"I haven't had so much fun in ages. I do wish I could take darling Jenny to London with me. She'd take the starch out of a few stuffed shirts. By the way, Madoc, what are you two planning to do for Christmas?" "Oh, I thought we might just sit on a bench in King Square and hold hands," her son replied. "Actually, I haven't had time to think about it much. Do you want to go up to Pitcherville, Jenny?" "Not particularly. Annabelle's brother and his tribe are coming down from Rivière-du-Loup, and her folks will be up too. The house will be popping at the seams. I don't know where they'd put us, unless we bunk over at the mansion with Mary and Emery. Scratch Pitcherville, then."
Rhys had been forced to spend a couple of nights at the mansion when he had first gone there on official business and had no desire to take further advantage of Marian's hospitality.
"Perhaps I'll keep my room here at the hotel, and we can see a couple of movies or something. Your landlady might even let me come up for another cup of tea, now that we're on the verge of making it legal."
He was trying to kiss the back of Janet's neck, and she was telling him to behave himself when another very important person stopped at their table. "Here's a merry party. How nice to see you again, Lady Rhys. What brings you to St. John?"
"Mr. Condrycke, what a pleasant surprise. Won't you join us for a glass of champagne to celebrate my son Madoc's engagement? This is my new daughter-in-law-to-be, Janet Wadman. Isn't she lovely?"
"She is indeed. Congratulations, Rhys, Miss Wadman." He looked a trifle puzzled as he took the hand she held out to him. "Is it possible we've met somewhere?"
"Not to say met," Janet replied. "I was the one who took in the tea at your board meeting day before yesterday when Miss Perce was laid up with flu. You were the only one who bothered to say thank you."
"Well, well." Mr. Condrycke threw back his handsome blonde-gray head and laughed. "That goes to show politeness always pays. One never knows whom one's going to meet where these days. So you're another of those liberated ladies who go in for careers. You must meet my daughter. Valerie's determined to break into television, don't ask me why. And you're a musician, I suppose, like the rest of your distinguished family, eh, Rhys?"
"No, I'm the black sheep," Madoc admitted. "I was born with a tin ear. Madoc works for the Canadian government, in research."
Lady Rhys glared at her son, daring him to say her nay. He had no wish to do so, not because he wasn't proud to be a Mountie, but because he often found it prudent not to advertise the fact. "Computers and that sort of thing, I suppose," Mr. Condrycke said, not very interestedly. He took the chair Lady Rhys indicated, and the glass the waiter filled for him. "To your very good health and happiness, Mr. and Mrs. Rhys, and a Merry Christmas to all. What are your plans for the holidays?"
"We were just talking about that," said Lady Rhys. "I'm off to London tonight to meet my husband. He's doing the Messiah for the royal family. Dafydd's singing the tenor, and our daughter Gwendolen will be in the orchestra, so it's quite a family affair, except for Madoc. He claimed he couldn't get the time off to join us, and now I understand why." She gave Janet an indulgent smile. "It's a pity these two couldn't have got their plans together a bit sooner. Janet's people are having a big house party and don't have room for them, so it looks as if they'll be all by themselves right here in St. John. Can you imagine anything more deadly?" She was joking, of course, but Mr. Condrycke seemed to think she wasn't. "That's terrible. Can't be allowed. Excuse me one moment. I'm going to get my wife." "Who's this Mr. Condrycke?" Madoc asked, as the man left the table. "He's a patron of the arts," Lady Rhys replied rather grandly. "One meets them at benefits and receptions. I believe Dafydd took the daughter out once or twice when he came here to sing at a community concert." "That is quite possible," said Rhys. "There are not many families whose daughters' Daffod is not taken out, or in, as the case may be." "Really, Madoc, what will Jenny think?" "I hope she'll think she was lucky to meet me instead of Daffod, though that is a great deal to hope. Jenny, love, what do you know about Mr. Condrycke?" "He's the one member of the board everybody seems to like, is all I can tell you. His first name is Donald, not that I've ever got to use it, needless to say. He's not around the office as much, and I've never had any personal contact with him except that one time with the tea. We've been short-handed these past few days. You know how people tend to come down with mysterious ailments around the holidays. Anyway, Mr. Condrycke speaks to people in elevators and that sort of thing, and always looks good-natured, which makes him conspicuous among the top brass." "Has he been with the company long?" "Forever, I believe, though I haven't been there long enough myself to say for sure. It's my impression the Condryckes were among the founding fathers." "I shouldn't be surprised," said Lady Rhys. "He looks like old money." "Mother, what a snob you are!" cried Madoc. "No, dear, just aware of who's good for a decent-sized donation and who isn't. Music is so often a grace and favour sort of business, you know. Do stop detecting and try to act like a gentleman for once. Ask that waiter to bring us another chair for Mrs. Condrycke and another bottle of bubbly." "I shall need a decent-sized donation to pay for this meal if you insist on turning it into a formal reception." "Nonsense, Madoc. You know Aunt Oldris Rhys-Brown left you pots of money." "Not pots, mother." "Well, a good deal more than she left the rest of us. Aunt Oldris always hated music. I strongly suggest you two find yourselves a decent house straight away, instead of going into lodgings. Jenny will be leading much the same sort of life I've had to, I expect, either trailing around after you to heaven knows where, or else at home with the babies, wondering whether your plane's crashed or your lead soprano's having a temperament. Though with you I expect it will be bullets and burglars. In any event, she must have a place of her own. There's always so much bother about a house that it keeps one's mind off what one's husband may have got himself into when one's not around to look after him. Mrs. Condrycke, how very nice to see you again. Are we taking you away from a party?" "Yes, but it's a company affair, and quite frankly I'm delighted at the excuse to slip away. You see, Miss Wadman, I'm throwing myself on your mercy not to repeat that. Donald tells me you're a member of the firm, too, though soon to become an ex-member?"
Mrs. Condrycke's manner was just gracious enough, her smile just the right degree arch, as she glanced with proper respect at the fine heirloom diamond gracing Janet's left hand.
"I hardly qualify as a member of the firm," Janet replied, with,
Madoc was amused to note, the perfect mixture of modesty and amusement.
"And I expect I shall be leaving before I've managed to scrabble my way out of the stenographic pool." "Shall you miss it, do you think?" "With all respect to the firm, not a bit. I like keeping house, and I think office work is a bore." "Then you must have a heart-to-heart chat with my daughter Val. Which brings us, as that other bore who's making the speech back there is probably saying about now, to the true object of our meeting. My husband and I are hoping we can persuade you and Madoc to come up to Graylings with us."
"Graylings is up on the Bay Chaleur, not too far from Dalhousie," Mr. Condrycke explained. "My father and some other members of our family live there year-round. We're a bit feudal in our ways, and we tend to go all out for Christmas. Yule logs and wassail bowls and silly jokes, you know. It's totally informal and great fun. At least we think so, don't we, Babs?"
His wife nodded. "The Condryckes are the jolliest crowd imaginable, and the house is a gem. Enormous and about 100 years behind the times, but quite comfortable, really. Squire, that's our pet name for my father-in-law, even has an old retainer who brings one morning tea in the real old English tradition. It's like taking a step backward in time. Huge open fires and, thank goodness, a hot air furnace of sorts, and some airtight stoves to put back the heat the fires suck up the chimneys, and tons of lovely food. I always have to put Donald on a diet after we've been to Graylings."
"She does indeed," laughed Donald Condrycke. "Valerie's bringing her current young man, and my nephews will be home from boarding school, so you kids can enjoy watching us oldsters make fools of ourselves. Please say you'll come." It was hard to picture the Condryckes making fools of themselves, but quite possible to believe Graylings would be an agreeable place to spend the holiday. Janet, who'd never been much of anywhere, was trying to look poised and gracious, and, in fact, giving a pretty good imitation of Cinderella being presented with a brand-new pumpkin. Lady Rhys was clearly pleased with herself, her hand-picked daughter-in-law, and even, as a startling change from custom, with her son. Having chosen such a different path from the rest of his family, Madoc hadn't thought about what Janet might encounter when she was with her future in-laws. Perhaps he ought to let her have this taste of what being a Rhys could mean. "Thank you," he replied. "If you're quite sure you want us, Janet and I will be delighted to come up for a day or two. Won't we, Jenny?" "It's kind of you to ask us," Janet said in the sweet, low voice that was going to delight Sir Emlyn when he got to hear it. "What shall we bring?" Chapter 2. The Condryckes offered a ride up to Graylings in their car, but Madoc was loath to give up a day alone with his Jenny. "Just tell us where it is, and we'll find the place." "It's a long drive," Babs Condrycke replied doubtfully, "and we'd hate you to miss dinner. Isn't it tomorrow night we do the Yule log, Donald?" "half-past on the dot. Then the wassail and the roast goose. I hope you eat goose, Miss Wadman." "I generally eat what's put in front of me," she replied in the prim Pitcherville way Madoc found so adorable. "We'll be there on time if Madoc says we can. Now, shouldn't we be thinking about getting Lady Rhys to the airport?" They said their farewells to their prospective host and hostess, and set about getting Madoc's mother out of her diamonds and into her traveling costume. While she was changing, Janet and Madoc telephoned up to Pitcherville. Annabel was smug when Janet said she'd been wearing the beaver cape when Madoc put the ring on her finger, and flabbergasted when she learned what sort of family Janet would be marrying into. Bert got on the phone and made a great babble from the background and hoped his sister wouldn't be too high and mighty to speak to her poor relations. Madoc said she damn well wouldn't, and Bert had better get set to catch him when he fainted at the wedding, and here was Mother to say hello. Thereupon Lady Rhys said hello, and a great deal more about how delighted she was that Madoc had found such a wonderful girl, and what a credit Janet was to her upbringing, which of course was a most delicate compliment to Bert and Annabel, who'd raised his younger sister since she'd been orphaned while still at school. At last they hung up in an atmosphere of long-distance bonhomie and went to the airport. The long taxi ride back was the best part of all. The next morning, Janet was up betimes, and while she waited for Madoc to take her to breakfast, regaled her awestruck landlady with an account of how Lady Rhys had sung for the Queen Mum. They spent a long time over the meal, trying to have a serious discussion about the things they ought to be seriously considering, and having to break off to say the things they really wanted to say. After that, Madoc took Janet to Burke's. "I meant for us to pick out the ring today," he explained. "Do you really like that one Mother gave us, or would you rather have something different? You'll be wearing it for the rest of your life, you know." "I know." Janet gave him such a misty-eyed smile he was forced to kiss her right there on the sidewalk, to the delight of many Christmas shoppers and the Salvation Army lassie who was collecting donations on the corner. "I adore the ring, darling, and I wouldn't dream of hurting your mother's feelings by choosing another in its place. Why don't you just buy me a nice plain one to go with it?" So they picked out a wedding ring for Janet, but not for Madoc, because wedding rings were noticeable, and in his line of work it was often better not to be. Then Madoc wanted to buy Janet some diamond earrings to go with her engagement ring, but she talked him into a string of pearls that would be modest enough for Pitcherville, but elegant enough to wear before royalty should she ever have occasion, as it now seemed entirely possible she might. They then returned to get Madoc's luggage and check him out of the hotel, retrieve his car from the garage, and swing around to collect Janet's suitcase from her now totally overwhelmed landlady. At that point, Janet gave Madoc the russet wool sweater she had spent all fall knitting him, because she couldn't stand to wait till Christmas Day, and he might as well have it to wear up at the Condryckes, because goodness knew what the weather would be like up there. She herself wasn't banking any too heavily on that old hot-air furnace and had packed her thermal underwear just in case. Then Madoc had to try on the sweater, which fitted him perfectly and made him look far handsomer than the pictures Lady Rhys had shown Janet of his famous brother Dufris. What with one thing and another, they were impossibly late, starting what would have been roughly a 300-mile drive. So they drove the 65 miles to Fredericton, dropped in at RCMP headquarters to receive general felicitations as well as sandwiches and mugs of tea gratis from the canteen, got rid of Madoc's car, and bummed a lift in a helicopter that happened to be headed up Dalhousie Way. The pilot knew Graylings, even without Madoc's directions. According to him, the place wasn't all that close to Dalhousie, but way the hell and gone out in the middle of nowhere. He was surprised Madoc and Janet had got invited. The Condryckes were a clannish lot, though he guessed they did throw the odd bash for visiting swells when the mood was upon them.
"Big place, I understand,"
Madoc observed.
"Cripes, I'll say. Looks from the air like one of those old castles or something. Costs a packet to keep up, eh?"
"Oh, I doubt there's any dearth of money in that crowd. You warm enough, Janet? There's hot tea in the thermos behind you, and an extra blanket if you need it."
"Oh, thanks. Right now I'm so excited I couldn't tell you whether I'm cold or not. I've never been up in one of these things before. Besides, she's got her thermal underwear,"
Madoc added, reaching from the seat behind to tuck Janet up in the blanket and get in a squeeze or two. Even in ski pants and a down jacket, Janet was an eminently huggable young woman. They had their tea. After a while, Janet began to weary of white snow and green-black forest and the noise of rotor blades overhead. The sky grayed, then darkened. It was an ineffable relief when the pilot shouted at last, "We're going down!" and brought his craft's skis to rest on a vast plowed-out driveway in front of the biggest private dwelling she'd ever been this close to. By now it was really dark, a beautiful clear night, with each separate star glittering like the diamond in her new engagement ring. As she climbed stiffly out of the helicopter, Janet could feel tiny icicles forming inside her nose.
"Thank you again for the ride," she called up to the pilot. "You come and see us as soon as we have a house."
"Don't forget your thermal underwear. You'll want it up here, that's for sure." He handed down the bags. Janet and Madoc walked up the steps of Graylings and thumped on the knocker. A tall, handsome, elderly replica of Donald answered the door. This must be Squire himself. He was all affability.
"Here you are, just in time. Delighted you could come. Good God, what's that racket? Donald! Babs! They've flown up in a helicopter! Come and see, quick!"
A great many large blond people crowded to the front windows to watch the flying bug take off. They all appeared to think young Rhys and his bride-to-be had done something screamingly funny by arriving in this really not-so-unusual way. For a country as big and as underpopulated as Canada, small aircraft were often the most practical form of transport. Anyway, it was pleasant to find themselves getting off on the right foot among so merry a party. Mrs. Condrycke came forward to do her best as hostess. She was wearing an ankle-length skirt of hand-woven wool in the black watch tartan, and a dark green mohair pullover with a rolled neck, managing to look chic and warm at the same time. Her only ornaments, Janet was pleased to note, were her diamond rings and a nice string of pearls.
"Do call me Babs," she urged. "The only Mrs. Condrycke around here is Granny, who hasn't come downstairs yet. My husband is Donald, as you doubtless know. Squire is Squire, and he gets livid if you call him anything else. Don't you, Squire, darling?"
"Positively foam at the mouth," he agreed. "We must get these young adventurers into something comfortable right away. You must be half frozen, Miss Wadman. Or may I say, Janet?"
"Please say Janet."
She couldn't picture Squire foaming at the mouth, except perchance over a tankard of brown October ale. He looked like the embodiment of all the Squire Allsworthys who'd ever galloped across a British countryside. He even had on suitably ancient +4s and knitted wool socks in a brown and yellow argyle pattern, with a bright yellow pullover and a tweed jacket with suede leather patches at the elbows. Like the other Condryckes, he was tall and burly and fair, with eyes of a clear light blue. In fact, the entire group looked much alike. Babs was another blue-eyed blonde, and so were the rest of the in-laws. A family that came in matched sets was going to be a problem to keep sorted out. Janet tried to remember.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?